So we're here today to talk about two of the greatest writers of modern China, and really two of the greatest writers of the 20th century anywhere. Lu Xun, a real pioneer in the new culture movement and the revolutionizing of modern Chinese writing, and then a generation later, Eileen Chang, one of the great women writers of the 20th century. So suppose we start with Lu Xun.
One of the great Chinese modernists, a good example of how world literature was refracted through China, which was just in the process of modernizing. And this is one of the interesting questions about Lu Xun, that he lived at a tumultuous time. China was going through all kinds of changes. Can you sketch a little bit the picture of those changes?
Well, he's very much a central figure in Chinese culture and also a kind of international modernist at the same time. He's born just a few months before both James Joyce and Virginia Woolf, for example. It's this modernist generation, though on the other side of the world. And he grows up being very much part of the interest in connecting to the wider world. The Chinese of his generation are very aware that Japan has gotten with the program of science, technology, progress as they're seeing it, and is indeed starting to progress into colonial ambitions in mainland China itself. And so there's a kind of fascination and ambivalence with both the West and also with Japan as a kind of window to the West. So Lu Xun himself goes to study medicine in Japan and really intends to be a doctor and come back and heal people. His own father had died while he was an adolescent, not well treated, he felt, by traditional Chinese medicines. He's going to learn this great new sort of Western mode. But then in his biology class, his professor shows some sort of random slides to fill up time at the end of class. And one of the slides shows a Chinese man about to be executed by the Japanese with a bunch of passive Chinese onlookers. This is the Japanese are sort of part of their incursion into China. Lu Xun is shocked that his students around him, most of them are Japanese, are applauding this. And he thinks, all right, something has to be done. And he decides that before China can be healed physically, it needs to be healed spiritually. And he turns to literature and all kinds of writing as a way to sort of try to push the culture forward.
And it's interesting that he, though, does not turn back to traditional Chinese literature, or not only, but he continues to absorb the modernizing literary influence of the West, which he absorbs in Japan. So he doesn't entirely reject the role of Japan as a conduit for Western, in this case, culture, but perhaps he doesn't accept it, but he absorbs it.
In some degree, you could see this in various parts of the world. Probably intellectuals in India learn a lot from Britain, even if they're opposed to the British imperial presence. It becomes a conduit for them for all kinds of world culture. And so Lu Xun becomes fluent in German as well as Japanese. He has a large library of books in German, books in Japanese, and he translates a great deal, as also does his brother, Zhou Zhuoren, who learns classical Greek and translates from Greek. So there's a lot of translation, retranslation. It's a very international movement.
And he also translates a lot from Russian, right? And Russia, of course, is culturally perhaps somewhat closer to China.
Geographically as well as culturally, they see the Russians as ahead of them in struggling for a couple of generations with this problem. The problem is, as the great intellectual novelist Chernyshevsky said in the mid-19th century, "Что делать? What is to be done? How are we to deal with this decaying, ossified, autocratic czarist regime, this oppressed peasant population of serfs, the sense of having fallen behind Western Europe?" And all of these things seem very relevant in the Chinese context as well.
He learns languages, he translates, but just translating foreign works is not the only thing he does. It's not the only thing he wants to do.
And I think a large part of this is reform does not happen individually. He becomes part of a group. And one of the things you see here is what becomes known as a new culture movement, later often called the May 4th movement, following a big demonstration in May 4th, 1919, really sparked by students at Peking University, but then spreading very widely, in which there's a huge demonstration in Tiananmen Square against the Chinese government having reluctantly agreed to sign on to the Versailles Treaty that ends World War I, in which, though they were on the side of the victorious Allies, possessions that Germany had held in mainland China are now given to Japan. Tremendous betrayal. So there's politics, and then there's also cultural reform totally intertwined for these folks.
So this is a political movement, but at this moment in his career, he's particularly interested in cultural politics, or the role culture and literature can play in reforming China, absorbing some global influences, while at the same time making China independent.
So it's both independent and international at the same time.
Right.
It's a key to it. Very much like world literature will be, always part of a wider world and also very much rooted often in its locale. But he's also very ambivalent. He's unsure of what to do. He tries starting a couple of magazines that they don't work. He's back home in Shanghai, and he describes himself in the preface to his early collection, Outcry, as just copying old inscriptions, just wanting to have his life drift away. He doesn't have a sense of purpose. But then a friend says, oh, we're starting a new magazine. Couldn't you give us something? And for this, he writes the absolutely pivotal story, The Diary of a Madman, loosely based on Gogol's famous story, Nikolai Gogol, whom he had recently read in Japanese translation, adapting it now to Chinese circumstances. And it's very much the impetus of a friend saying, look, we're starting this magazine, which becomes La Jeunesse, interesting French title, soon redubbed New Youth, the Chinese title, and his own brother, Zhou Zhuren, and several of his friends are involved in this. And it's this kind of small social network that they inspire each other to move against what seem like huge forces of stagnation in the status quo.
So they start a magazine to change the world. What do they publish and what drives this idea too? If you want to change the world, you start Culture magazine.
That's right. These movements have really two centers of gravity. One is Beijing, where there are these new universities, quite newly established, Peking University, Tsinghua University, and as often in the world, it is students moving change forward. And then also Shanghai, which is perhaps the most international city on the mainland. China, you have had a long period of French settlement and British settlement. You have some Germans, some Dutch, some Americans there. Very international world. And the New Youth magazine started in Shanghai, where Lu Xun and several of his friends are from. And they publish all kinds of things, political essays, they publish poems, they publish manifestos, they publish fiction, they publish poetry of their own and their friends, and a lot of translations. And often they'll show the original. They have Portuguese poems in Portuguese and in English and in Chinese translation. They have French, they have La Marseillaise. They have things that are going to be kind of inspiring. In 1916, they published the last poem of Joseph Plunkett, who's a poet involved with the Irish Rebellion. He had been an organizer of the Easter Rising in 1916, and he writes this poem shortly before he's executed by the British, hours after marrying his childhood sweetheart. So it's a romantic story, it's a political story. They publish this in English and in Chinese.
So in other words, if you want to change the world, you publish a magazine in world literature.
Exactly.
An obvious solution, if you ask me.
Absolutely obvious solution.